I'm going to ask each of those four speakers to join me now for a panel discussion in the next 20 minutes or so. But I'm also going to introduce our local delivery partners in York and Wakefield. Anna Hartley, Director of Public Health in York, and Joe Micheli, Head of Commissioning Anna Hartley in Wakefield and Joe Micheli in York. I'm going to start to kick us off, I think, on this by asking Anna and Joe, perhaps particularly, given, as I know, having spent 35 years in public service local authorities, how busy you are at the moment. Why it is you wanted to get involved in this project? I mean, we're very glad you did, as you will have heard. And what's probably the single most valuable thing that you will take away from that participation and collaboration? So Anna, would you like to kick us off with your thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, so thanks. So I suppose there's something about things being urgent or things being important. And obviously the whole of the last year has been about urgent stuff with COVID. But that's also deeply frustrating because that's not how I want to spend my time. You know, I don't want to spend my time doing that. And I also think COVID has highlighted so many of kind of the deep inequalities within our society that this kind of work actually is incredibly effective at reducing. So when I was asked to take part in this work, first I was really, really pleased because it's really lovely to be recognised, and we get, you know, there's loads of stuff we need to learn, there's loads of stuff we get wrong, but that was lovely. And especially with York, because I know Joe's, you know, they've done such great work, and so that's really, really nice. So I won't say that. I'll be honest and say that. But also, I think, you know, everyone wants their career or their energy to be spent on stuff that's meaningful. And for me, this is the most meaningful thing that you can do. This is the thing that has the biggest impact, in my view, on people's health and well-being. And I started life in the voluntary sector in Leeds, working for a multi-purpose community anchor, essentially. So part of the locality group, or BASAC as it was in those days. And I just saw firsthand what a big difference these sort of, whatever you wanted to call them, social prescribing, personalised approaches meant. But I also think we sometimes, particularly in the statutory sector, we almost lose our sort of common sense, because we sort of think of, we call people patients or service users, but we're all patients and service users. And when I've had times in my life, like I was, you know, when I had my first baby, or other times when I've been struggling, or not even struggling, the things that have given me the most value in my life have been those connections, have been the things that were so brilliantly described in Merron's presentation. So why wouldn't we want to kind of support that? And so often statutory services can actually be a barrier rather than a sort of supporter and a promoter of that. So I suppose the second, sorry, I had logical points, but I've gone off on one a bit now. But bringing it back to logic, my second logical point is there's just this thing for me, and this deep frustration that I often hold, that we don't recognise what we've already got. So this stuff has been going on for years, and it's brilliant. And, you know, any street you walk through, or any community you live in, you will find this stuff going on, informally or formally. And, you know, this hasn't suddenly been discovered. What I think is becoming more to the fore is that people are recognising it more in the mainstream how incredibly valuable and meaningful this is. And, you know, so entrenched inequalities around income, employment, ethnicity, those are absolutely an incredibly important thing to shift. But the value of connectedness within any community, no matter what challenges they're experiencing, is, to me, always hugely important and life-changing, essentially. And I've seen that sort of firsthand. And I suppose, my final point is that, you know, the other thing that drives me up the wall is this constant criticism. Well, sorry, maybe that's a bit unfair. Often a criticism, particularly from maybe my more sort of medical colleagues around, and not in Wakefield actually, because they're brilliant in Wakefield, but historically sometimes, that, well, there's no evidence around this approach. Like, why would we fund it? Why would we support it? We don't have the evidence. And I suppose partly why I wanted to take part in this, because I think it's about building that evidence base, building that research, building that kind of common understanding. And you know, we've done a rigorous evaluation in Wakefield because because I don't want that thrown at me. I don't want to invest significant amounts of money and then be told you didn't demonstrate effectiveness, because actually, you know, we can and we have. And then just sort of, sorry, my final point, this is my final point, is just that we were really mindful of the fact that it does put pressure on local voluntary sector organisations if people are getting signposted into those services without money to follow that person. And I'm not sure we've got that quite right. What we've done is we've created 150 grand a year grants pot, which any local organisation can you know, apply to support the work that the social prescribing service you know, increases for them. I would really like to kind of do better. I think we can do better at that, and I think some of the learning from this piece of work is really helping me sort of stimulate some of my thoughts around that. We have given, you know, I mean, I've managed to get lots and lots of COVID money out to local charities, particularly community anchors this year, probably well over £1 million, and that's really been because we've had those structures in place and we've had this work in place that's meant we've been able to really get that money out. And actually COVID has been amazing for all of the social prescribing work, the community anchors, people who previously didn't understand the value now really do. So actually that's, whilst it's put people under huge pressure, it has had that really positive outcome. So I'm going to hand over to Joe now. Stop talking.
Hi everyone, hopefully you can hear me. Happy Social Prescribing Day, as everybody's been saying. Good to see it's trending. Why we joined the programme, purely on a very personal level. I know Sian Lockwood very well and have a long relationship with Community Catalyst. So when Sian approached myself and York to get involved in this, we naturally said yes. Community Catalysts also host local area coordination nationally, and we have a very successful LAC program in York that collaborates very strongly with our social prescribing colleagues. So we felt that we had a strong story to tell and share, but also wanted to grow the evidence base around what we were already doing. I think one of a few of the key learning points for me, because Anna must have got about 3 or 4 in then when she was talking, reflects that when we had the 3-4 workshops across the system with very many different actors and stakeholders, what came across to me was that the passion for this agenda from the people that were attending, whether that was a community leader, a community group, somebody from the social prescribing team, somebody from housing, you know, a member of our LAC team. But what came across really strongly was an understanding of the strength-based approach in York that different sectors have now signed up to and can articulate very clearly. So it's not just me, you know, with a role in the council that is meant to be leading our asset-based approach strategically, trying to explain this. You have whole different parts of the system passionately talking about this, and I was really proud to hear that. And I think it reflected a point from Ewan when he was talking about how we need to support all different parts of the system to get this agenda and work in a different way that is more person-centered, is more about the social model rather than the medical model, and how we can support people to achieve outcomes for themselves with better help, with good help, and with asset or strength-based approaches. Because again, for me, one of the key things that's come out of COVID, but again, like Anna was saying, some of us have been in this space, I know I have, and others for 30 years now, reflecting how long in the tooth I am, is that we need to understand a bit better that how we can enable people to help one another based on shared principles and values around connection, collaboration, humility, kindness, etc., need to become core organizing principles for civil society in the state. And again, I think we've really seen our colleagues in health in the NHS join the party, probably over the last 2 to 3 years, because from a perspective of York, I can remember for the social prescribing service to be sustained. And at that point, we weren't getting any funding from health. Funding for the social prescribing team the Waste to Wellbeing team that is hosted by York CVS with brilliant leadership. The funding for that was coming through adult social care. But adult social care realised that the outcomes that we all want for people to have a better life, be stronger, be more connected, would meet our outcomes as well as the health system. And then you saw in 2018, obviously, with the rollout of the Linked Worker Programme linked to the National Strategy on Social Isolation, it being funded. You know, fantastic. But we still have more work to do on that. I know there's been a few questions in the chat that reflect competition for funding. So if we collaborate as a system and different actors in the system in your place, you will be more likely to attract funding and achieve the successful outcomes that we all want for people. And I think York does that incredibly generously. It is based on the relationships and time we spend on growing and maintaining those relationships and inviting people into this space, you know, to work collaboratively.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Anna. That's great. I think both of you not only talked about but displayed that passion that drives us all. I think in this particular agenda, and that's good to see. I think we shouldn't lose sight of the importance of that energy and its creativity. I think we've got time. I think probably just for a few questions. So. Bev, what's been coming up in the chat box, please?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Hi, it's Bev Taylor. I'm sorry you can't see me. My camera through the browser function doesn't work, but as I put in the chat box, that's probably a blessing with lockdown here. I've grouped them into a couple of themes, and that is culture and attitudes. And I think Joe and Anna answered that to some degree, but I just want to probe that a little bit more. And then the second grouping of things around funding. So the first one, what was the ability of the attitude of public services to make the necessary changes for personalised care? So not necessarily the partners that you've got on the panel, but maybe there are other statutory colleagues. I don't know if Joe or Anna, is it attitude of other public service colleagues to make the necessary changes for personalised care? Sounds as though you guys are completely bought and sold, and it's happened before and it's been ongoing for a while, but is there something that you could recommend to help the persuader, I suppose?
I don't mind trying to answer that.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, Ewan mentioned it. You know, we introduced a community operating model strategically across the council back in 2016 that is founded on early intervention, prevention and asset-based community development, you know, supporting people to do what they can, you know, seeing what's strong, not what's wrong. You know, that was led from adult social care and has become infectious across the council because it's a better way to do business through collaboration and strength-based practice. But it picks up on the importance of leadership for me. So we had a good group of key leaders in the council, complemented by a fantastic group of key leaders in the voluntary and community sector that wanted to collaborate and grow that understanding of how strength-based practice and person-centered approaches can change culture and behavior of a place. And I know Christine, who is the manager of the Social Prescribing service, is on the call today. We've seen across social prescribing and local area coordination and other approaches, the power of stories really change the culture and behaviors of people in our system. And that is just, as I said, become infectious. It's become the usual way to do things. Has changed the narrative from a deficit model to a strength or asset-based model. And we continue to plough forward with that because I'm sure people would agree it's a better way to do business.
Thanks, Joe. And another one, a similar theme, which addresses both attitudes and funding. I think you did touch on it, but it's how can we address the sense of competition with individuals and teams, particularly related to funding and commissioning, without damaging those relationships? Someone's popped in the chat box, it is a fine line between appeasement and challenging the behaviour where it's preventing joined up working. So how can we address the sense of competition with individuals and teams?
So I think that is really challenging because we are subject to there's lots of things here. We are subject to really tight procurement regulations, which do mean that we do need to we do need to have certain processes in place, particularly when we're giving out significant amounts of money. So with our Live Well Wakefield scheme, which is our social prescribing scheme, we decommissioned significant amounts of work in the statutory sector to be able to create a budget to then put out. And our infrastructure, our voluntary sector infrastructure organisation won that tender. So what that meant was that when I arrived in Wakefield, a lot of our services that would have been delivered by the voluntary sector were being delivered by the statutory sector, and that didn't feel right. So we were able to put that tender out, and the voluntary sector won that tender. And that's it's around 470k, something like that, a year. So it is quite a sizable amount of money. What I think one of the challenges for me is then when other people want to be part of that social prescribing arena and want funding from public health, is I've allocated all my social prescribing money to that particular pot, if you see what I mean. So then it's quite, and that's a lot. What I tend to do is do long contracts, because what bothers me is giving 1-year contracts to the VCS, because I feel like it's just not worth their while doing it. So actually, just practically, I think we've done that on a 7-year contract, which is the longest we can do it, in order to give that stability to the VCS and their ability to plan, create permanent posts. So the problem is with those contractual, by trying to improve things for the VCS, that also means that for that 7 years, the majority of my budget that I can spend on social prescribing is tied up in that way. So it is kind of trying to sort of balance lots and lots of different priorities. And ultimately, my ultimate goal is to create a stable VCS that's fully funded, that can attract like staff and deliver sort of the best outcomes for our population. My other sort of challenge as well is when I was in the VCS myself, I used to get really annoyed by the fact that our local primary care trust just used to give money to people they knew. So they didn't go through any sort of competitive process. And what that meant was they tended to work with people they already worked with, and people like me never got the chance. So it feels like whilst I don't, in one sense, I know competition's really unhelpful and it's really a waste of people's time, but there is something about trying to create a fair playing field for all voluntary sector organisations, and how we do that without the ones that and you'll I don't know if you recognise this or not, but there'll be some that are better at the kind of networking and sitting around the table, but actually what I want to do is try and be fair and transparent. So it is a little bit more complicated, I think, and obviously I've seen it from both sides. I've been in voluntary sector fundraising, and I'm now in the statutory sector trying to get money out to the voluntary sector. Just to go back as well to the previous question about culture, I mean, it is a real challenge. There are strongly held beliefs in all sectors about other sectors. One thing that we've done is we've trained people all together. So we did a lot of work around individual service funds, and I insisted that families, carers, service users, if that's what you want to call them, and staff were all trained together. And that, I think, that kind of approach does break down barriers, so everyone's learning together. And I did get some pushback from social care staff who said to me, one interesting comment was, you'll have to make it really, really simple, Anna, if you want parents and carers to understand the training. And I was like, really? You do get pushback, but as a leader you have to just hold, and it's not always comfortable, but you have to hold firm, because what you have to do is go, do you know what, this is the right thing to do and I'm going to do it, even if I annoy people, because essentially nothing will change unless sometimes we have to be uncomfortable. That's the truth. Statutory sector has to be uncomfortable. So I think that, that's really true. The other thing is, I don't know if anyone's read Radical Help, but that's very much around storytelling. And what we found with the individual service funds was we actually just sat with parents and carers we went for a coffee with parents and carers, and we spent about 2 hours a month just sitting talking to them. There wasn't an agenda, we didn't have a formal meeting, we just wanted to hear their stories. And I learned so much about what it's really like to have a child with a young person with a learning learning disability, and that really changed the whole way we shaped the service. And those parents ended up sitting on our monthly steering group with staff, you know, everyone just sat together as part of that steering group, and that felt much more meaningful than some of the quite tokenistic engagement that you get, where you know you sort of wheel people in for like 10 minutes on the agenda, and that doesn't feel as meaningful as actually spending significant amounts of time listening to people's stories and building trust. I know you can't do that in every case, but that's the kind of thing that I do think changes culture.
Brilliant, thank you, Anna. Some very complimentary comments in the chat box, and everybody totally agreeing on what you said. And on the bit of partners doing what they're good at, then there's some great learning as to how Community Catalyst approached this and allocated the work between the partners. I know Christiana was wanting to come back in, and I think Merron was as well, but I'll come to Christiana next, but we have got James Sanderson from the National Social Prescribing team here, Kim. If I can just take Christiana's point and ask her the question that was on funding as well. The funding question, Christiana, was a concern about capacity for organisations that are being referred into, and how do social prescribing link workers know that the referral routes in are capacity once they've referred in?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question. So just to answer it on that Anna just answered now. So from our point of view, we think, you know, it's about the statutory sector ensuring social justice, and, you know, it is addressing social injustice and inequality in everything that it does. So we just cannot be saying it. And I feel that the statutory sector are quite an anchor and should be leading on that, and that includes making sure it's practices. I also think there's a bit of work for all the partners or any organization that is involved in this landscape to make sure that we're being driven by person-centered approaches, and that is the needs of the person should drive the services that should stay or that should be commissioned. It has to be the needs of the person. And like I said in my presentation and in some of the slides, it is a continuum. So it is a continuum of person-centered care, and that should be what should be driving the commission arrangement. There is also the social value contract. So it's not just, you know, just commissioning, it's commissioning for social value and making sure we're building community wealth as well. The reason why that's one of the recommendations in our report is that the capacity building fund made available to the social prescribing programs, because I mean, you can see what's happening today. Social prescribing day is actually trending at #1. That is massive. It just shows that, again, it's owned by everybody, and that means that we need to build capacity, and various components of social prescribing includes the capacity building. And without the social prescribing link workers being empowered, or the social prescribing programs empowered with capacity building, it does actually discourage innovation, because the Community Group of the Year winner for the Link Worker Day 2020 awards was a community group in Scotland, and they identified, the GP practice identified there were some young people that were being underserved, and because they had a capacity building grant, these young people were able to set up a service for themselves. So I think absolutely this is about building capacity with the individuals as well as the communities. And what's been lacking is the capacity within the community and enabling that, and making sure that, you know, there is actually a resource, and the money is following the person. Money has to follow the person into the community.